Next, I call Deputy Colm Keaveney. You have 20 minutes, Deputy Keaveney.
Keaveney, Deputy Riley is somebody who I have great respect for. One of the first deputies that extended a hand of friendship to me and continues to do so since 2011. So I don't want to single out Deputy Riley's speech, but a significant emphasis has been made here today about fairness. And I don't hear about the fairness for the cancer patient who is receiving chemotherapy in an accident and emergency unit in a public area. And I don't know about the fairness for the 2,000 families that will turn up for food parcels at the Capuchin order this morning. I don't hear about the fairness for the 1,500 children who regard their hotel rooms as their home and are ashamed to say in their schools that their address is a hotel. And I don't hear about the fairness for the 431 patients that languish as we speak in accident and emergency units and on trolleys. I don't hear about those people who have profound disability, who are waiting in the budget to see that the adaptation and mobility grant were to be restored. It simply didn't happen. And I know of immigrants who want to return to Ireland but refuse to do so because of the chaotic services that exist in our public services, particularly our health service. I write to the Minister on a weekly basis for a young 18-month-old baby who's the daughter of Irish citizens working in Melbourne, highly qualified, technically superior and required in this economy, want to return home but can't because the public HSE system will not provide for supports to keep her daughter supported with necessary drugs. So we can cherry pick about the type of recovery we're having. Keaveney, before the last election, Deputy Rory Quinn boasted that only Labour could be trusted with the public service because he claimed that Labour was the only party that would protect their interests in government. And with the benefit of hindsight, we now know that Deputy Quinn's utterances on this matter should be placed alongside his commitment with respect to the introduction of the registration charge that was committed to publicly in Trinity. And I suppose all we have to do is look at all the other claims that were made in a Tesco ad. We look at the 40 cuts that took place under the stewardship of the Taoiseach. Only 2 of them have been restored. But yet there is a perception, we will hear today from government backbenchers, that this has been a fair budget. Well, let's look at the fairness, because newly recruited public servants are being left under this bill at a disadvantage relative to staff that were hired before 2011. And the ladder has been pulled up on a generation of young people in this country. It's been firmly pulled up. And an essential feature of a republic is that we should have equality before the law, that is, unjust differentials should remain, and there should be little sign of any future intent to remove it, particularly in the context of improving economic outlooks. From time to time, Fine Gael, when not suffering from the strange cultural cringe that lurks in their subconscious, like to remember that they had passed the Republic Act of Ireland. That might have been so, but they have little idea of what a republic looks like, because it doesn't mean that a country attacks its young people. It doesn't mean that the state tolerates tens of thousands of citizens being caught up in a housing or homeless crisis. And it doesn't mean that a country that continues to fail to secure the rights of disabled people in the participation of the broader society. Of course, all of this is part of a pattern. And it's part of a pattern that's initiated by the Taoiseach Joan Burton, who specifically targeted young people for special treatment. Their welfare payments were slashed from €188 per week to €100 per week. It was as if she thought that young people require less money to feed themselves, to clothe themselves, to pay the rent. Young people who are homeless could survive on €100 a week. A bizarre decision. During the recent referendum on marriage, many of the deputies, Fine Gael and Labour benches, they preened themselves under the banner, yes to equality. But what they meant was equality for some. As ever, they will grant equality where there is no money involved, but once any form of economic inequality is challenged, something that actually costs money to the exchequer, then the government runs away. The government will run away, and I regard this type of equality or argument around it as an absolute hypocrisy, and frankly I find it nauseating. Of course, not one or anybody would expect anything better from Fine Gael, because to be fair, at least you're honest about your position. But Labour have promoted themselves on the basis of social democracy values. Alas, all of that was too easily compromised in their wish to be part of a right-wing government. And as ever, the consequences of that inequality are many, and its effects run beyond the individuals directly impacted by those odious, horrific decisions. In the case of inequality being new and longer public services, the duration of employment, the slashes to pensions, the yellow pack nurses, all of those initiatives. Over the past 3 years, we see those graduate nurses and midwives have been on a starting salary slashed from 28,000 to over 20,000. I don't hear too many of the backbenchers looking at the fairness of that. Minister Howlin and Riley, not deputies, but former minister, were accused by graduate nurses at the time that they instigated their disparagement of the nursing profession, seeking to create yellow pack nursing. Minister Varadkar has done nothing to challenge that view. The attack on nursing is suggestive of an attitude of a mind that disparages professions dominated by women, and I can only wonder if any of the three ministers involved in this would have had countenance the attack on a male-dominated profession in the same manner. The undermining of the pay and working conditions of nurses and the effects beyond the young graduate nurses has driven thousands of these young graduates to foreign employers, and with so many young nurses leaving our shores, clearly the health service is now struggling to fill vacant posts. Taken alongside the continuing obstinate refusal to lift the moratorium on public services, it has led to a continuing degradation of the quality of outcome of our services for the most vulnerable people. We have managed to diminish our expectations of public services. It is now okay to deliver chemotherapy in a public accident and emergency unit, an immunocompromised patient, and nobody lifts an eyebrow about that. Nobody has a concern about the delivery of social wage in this country. So when we talk about that fairness, let's remember the fairness for the 1,500 children whose address is a hotel somewhere in Dublin, the 431 vulnerable people who are lying on trolleys as we speak. When I returned home last week, I met a senior citizen who said, I don't want €3 on my pension. I want to know, is my wife going to get the appointment that she's waiting 3 years to get with respect to her orthopaedic requirement? I want to know, am I going to get a restoration of the millions of hours that were cut in home health? That type of fairness, that type of social wage. Taken alongside the continuing refusal to recognise that situation, particularly for younger employees in the economy, the nurses, agency staff are being used to fill the gaps, but this practice has been identified as being more expensive than hiring staff contrary to the welfare of the patient. Consistently having somebody who understands the location and the speciality. Why would this government continue to adopt a strategy of hiring agency staff that are at a greater cost to the exchequer? Because they don't want to have a permanent relationship with people. And the constant churning of the personnel involved only undermines the consistency of the care and the love and the attention that's been delivered by frontline staff in our public health service. Cathaoirleach, education has suffered also from the moratorium on hiring, a reduction in the pupil-teacher ratio. The government seems to be of the view that education solely is an instrument in terms that it can function to prepare children to be workers. And the broader view of education, a view that includes character development, social, emotional well-being, the formation of what it means to be a citizen, it has been completely abandoned in our education system. And nowhere is that more evident than the decision to cut guidance counsellors. 500 citizens of this country die death by suicide every year, and we cut €60 million from a €700 million budget in mental health last year. And we then attack children by taking away their guidance counsellors. And if we're to repair the damage that has been done to our society by the economic crisis, societal damage that has been magnified by the choices of this government, concentrated, committed action is required to rebuild a broken society, and that must start with our public services. Public services alongside our social protection payments from the main part of the social wage that we talk about within our community is a key element in challenging the economic equality. the debate on the future of public services and the division that underpins them, the ambition that we have as a role in our society, ought to be the centre of the discussion here tonight and ought to be the centre of the debate here in the context of a forthcoming general election. But if we continue to narrow this debate down to concerning economy, taxation, economy, growth. Last Sunday, Cearl, we've seen a tweet from the Fine Gael headquarters that if Ireland was, if its economy was a rugby team, we would be accelerating this fast in terms of 6.5%, 7 or 8, 9% growth. Really, at the end of the day, the vast majority of people who I speak to want to see core issues addressed, such as supports for children. There are 20,000 children waiting over 2 years for speech and language therapy, audiological services, occupational therapy services. And this is a core part of what we talk about in terms of protecting the most vulnerable people. There are aspects of the bill that I welcome, but I think there's a significant volume missing from it. And there is little evidence in this bill that any conviction is provided in the bill, apart from a self-serving objective to tick a box coming into the forthcoming general election. In many of my early speeches to this House, I cautioned that we should not buy an economic recovery at the cost of damaging the social fabric. And I very much fear that that's exactly what has happened. I appreciate that that would be the ethos of one political party in government, but for the other, the absent party, they've let this happen. Because I'm convinced that the continued attack on public services, the contraction of public services, has gone some way to subsidise what is considered as an election budget. And the challenge for the next Dáil and the next government should not be primarily around the language of taxation and economy. We don't live in an economy, we live in a society. We are citizens in a society, we're not citizens in an economy. It has to be a discussion about the fabric of our social structures. So let's have a substantive debate in this country about the reality of the circumstances of people. Whether those people, the 140,000 people who are waiting on waiting lists for public housing, the hundreds of thousands of people who are waiting in chronic pain in our public health system waiting for an appointment, the millions of hours that have been cut from home help services, the most vulnerable people in society, even in my own constituency, the homeless people, sleeping in turf sheds. We need to start talking about delivering the social wage. We live in a society, not an economy. We can have that debate side by side, but clearly what we have is a government that's intent on driving society further down the agenda and the context of what society delivers, which is equality and fairness. And what it has managed to do over the course of the last 4 to 5 years is to diminish public expectation about what entitlements are and rights and equality in our public service.